Hi, on the Woodpecker today? Yes, I'm making this small foldable workbench that I'll keep outside. But you can do the same type of construction to make yourself a bigger foldable table for your home. I bet you remember the workbench I'm keeping in my trailer. Since I've restored it, I'm a bit ashamed of this workbench. I want to make another one. So, inspired by the table I made at the cottage, I'm going to make a workbench with foldable legs like this one. I will just have to bolt the legs in place and go on with my work. And for this, I'll only have these pictures as a plan. As for the wood, I'm going to use the last piece of the gallows I made when I raised the shop. So at the beginning of June, we get the central post out from under a tarp and let it air dry a bit on the trailer. But since I want to keep it dry, we bring it inside the shop. But it became quickly a pain lying around on the floor like that. So we tied it overhead. And at the beginning of October, it was time to get it down. First thing to do is to cut it in three. But the sawzall was not the tool for the job. As you can see, this won't be a luxury. When we're done, René stays with me and we cut all the wood I'll need. This takes a while and I have almost all the wood. I get the last piece from my loft. A neighbor threw this nice piece away. And now, since I have all the wood, it's time to surface all the pieces for the top. When it's done, I lay all the pieces the way I want them to be. Trace some lines for domino mortises, trace a triangle for the placement of each piece, and drill all the mortises. Then I glue 3 sections together, no more than 4 pieces together. And leave this to dry all night. The next day, I glue the 3 sections together. And while the glue dries, I work on the legs. First thing to do is to finish all the surfacing of the rest of the wood. Next, cut this to the length of the legs. I have the legs. I need the 2 top stretchers. This will be joined together with bridle joints. I begin by the mortises. After changing the setup, it's time to cut the tenons. With this jig, this goes pretty fast. But my saw blade was not big enough for the size of my wood. So, to cut the cheek, I need to make a series of cuts. And finish it with hand tools. The legs will go together just like that. But the top rails are too wide. I fix this right away. But I also need 2 more rails for the legs assembly. I begin by cutting the tenons. Then I lay everything on my table saw and trace where the mortises should be. To make sure I have both of them at the same place, I use a wood spacer. Then it's time to cut the mortises. And glue both legs assembly. The second set of legs is glued on my other workbench. At the end of the day, I have the 3 glue-ups I made drying. This top is not bad for an outdoor workbench, but since it's made of hemlock, I have cracks and nuts here and there. I'm going to fill all of them with 5-minute epoxy glue. And while the epoxy is curing, I'm going to finish the legs. I need to drill some holes on the top rail of the legs, so I'll be able to bolt the legs to the top. But to drill straight holes, I'm pre-drilling a block of wood. Then I use it to drill the legs. I also route a roundover everywhere. Now that the epoxy is cured, I can sand the top of my workbench and cut it to the right dimensions. For the top, I'm going to use an epoxy finish. I know, it's overkill, especially for the use I intend to do with it. But the worst part is that I'm making a huge mistake right now. I'm beginning by the top of my workbench. But at this time, I didn't know I was messing everything up. Spreading epoxy is pretty simple. You pour it on the top and spread it even. When I'm done, it's full of small bubbles. Nothing a good propane torch can fix. Now I just need to wait for the epoxy to cure. It's only the next day when I turn it over that I realize that starting with the top was a huge mistake. I have all these drops to remove from under the top. Here, it's not bad. I just remove them and spread a coat of epoxy. When I'm done, I still need to wait another 24 hours. And obviously, now I've butchered the top of the workbench. I have to remove all the drops. But I don't want to waste another day. I'll put another coat of epoxy another day. Instead, I'm going to put the legs in place. So, when they're where I want them to be, I mark the placement of the insert nuts. But before that, I need to make a quick jig. This is quite easy. On one side, I drill a hole to the size of the bolts. On the other one, I drill a bigger hole the size of the insert nut. Then I remove one corner on the small side, and that's ready to use. I just need to align the point of the brad point bit over the marks I've made and drill the inserts holes. Next, I use the other side so I can screw the inserts straight. Now I can screw the legs in place. But just like that, this won't be strong enough. So, just like for the cottage table, I cut a support for the center and screw it in place. Now that the holes are done, I remove it and screw 4 hinges to it. When it's done, it's time to screw 4 more on the legs, 2 on each set. All this is to hold the braces that will keep the legs straight. So after cutting those braces, I screw them in place. And now the legs are super strong. But I still have one small problem. If I unbolt the legs and try to fold them on themselves, well, it doesn't work. It's the reason why at the cottage I made some notches so both pieces go inside each other. But I don't want to notch the top rail here. So I mark the placement of the rails on each brace and I'll glue a piece of wood just here over the marks. When every mark is done, I disassemble it, cut some pieces a bit longer than what I need and glue them together. Now I need to wait for the glue to dry. When it is, I remove the excess glue, rip 4 strips to the right width, cut them to length, and remove one corner, just for the look. Then I glue them in the center of my marks. Now I need to wait for the glue to dry, and when it is, I make that straight. And mark what I need to actually remove. After the final sanding, there are still more corners to remove. And this is the final look. I could have removed a little bit less wood. Well, it's done now. Last thing to do before putting the finish on is to round over all the sharp corners. The finish is quite simple. I mix the same amount of paint thinner, spar varnish, and linseed oil together. Stir a bit and wipe the finish. After a while, it's done. I just need to wait for this to dry before wiping another coat. The next day, it's time to put back everything in place. Finally, I have a workbench. But unfortunately, I need to apply another coat of epoxy on the top. All this because of the drops I had the other day. But yet again, I messed up. After wiping the epoxy, I needed space in my shop, so I brought the workbench outside. Now I have insects' legs inside the epoxy. And this is half bad if I compare it to the whole flies. Or worst. I know it's pretty original. But now my new workbench is ready to get to work. And as you can see, the height was measured so that with a miter saw, it ends up at the same height as my sawhorses. This will be super useful. And when I'll fold it, I won't need to keep it outside all winter long. I'll be able to store it under my new carport. This was my new outdoor workbench. You can also, just like I did at the cottage, use this technique to make a foldable table. This could have been much lighter if the top wasn't that thick. I don't know how the epoxy will react outside. I'll see this over the years. But one thing for sure, now I'm not ashamed of putting this new workbench inside my trailer. I hope you liked it, and let me know if you build a table or workbench like this. And see you soon for another episode of the Woodpecker.